We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, I think it's one of the most marvelous things that's ever happened to us, and I wish them all the luck in the world.
What's your reaction?
Well, I think it's important. It's a wonderful thing to happen, but I think there's a lot of problems on Earth that need solved.
I think it's really a great event for a man from just our planet, not just the United States, to get on actually be on another world.
I believe it's a historical event for everybody, the whole world. I think they looked upon it as a great accomplishment for the U.S. to be up there.
I think eventually we'll have people populating Mars. At least that's my hope. It might help with population problems.
Welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals once again as we delve into one of the nicher and more nebulous punk genres out there, NASA punk, or cassette retrofuturism. From the steaming pile of garbage that is Starfield to the glorious sci-fi classic of the Alien movies. Strap in for an exploration of this late 20th century based genre that has a focus on white Macintosh computers, clacky keyboards, forklifts, and exploration for a generation that saw a future amongst the stars. As always, if you like this and want even more, subscribe to the channel. Roughly 97% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so if you like it, join up with us. Get busty. That's a bad slogan. Get your thunder on. No, that's worse. I don't know, let me know what I should refer to the audience as. Or y'all are just going to be known as the Animal Farm. Either way, subscribe to the channel and check the playlist up here in the corner for even more just like this. But without further ado, let's get into it. Now, the term NASA punk, as far as I can tell, hasn't really come up at all until Starfield, a sci-fi game about exploring space by Bethesda Softworks. Now, cassette retrofuturism has been a thing for a long time now, technically starting around 1968's 2001 A Space Odyssey and even featuring prominently in the classic sci-fi stories like Alien. But this is the hardest one to stretch into the punk subgenre. Now look, I can make the stretch for biopunk, Lego punk, solar punk, etc. But with NASA punk, this is our first subgenre that is entirely focused on the aesthetic and American values of NASA in the 1960s during the Cold War, rather than being based in some punk movement. You can maybe make a case that it's punk in the same way that vouching for NASA to be spending money on exploration is more punk than sending all that cash overseas to blow up children. But even still, I'd call it the greatest stretch we've made so far. For the most part, NASA punk, or cassette retrofuturism, Jesus, that's a fucking long name, is taking the aesthetics and ideals of an America that wanted to and vowed to visit the moon in the midst of the Cold War. Now, most of the explanation for this I'm taking actually from a Reddit post by user Lando Free, Homo Slave. Great name that is. Because I think it fits perfectly into how I would also describe the NASA punk or hard sci-fi aesthetics of this sub-genre within sci-fi. You remember the second episode of Futurama, where Leela can't understand why Fry is so obsessed with the moon, calling it a lifeless, barren rock that nobody cares about apart from the tacky amusement park? Those who see Starfield aesthetic as generic are Leela in this situation. Todd is Fry. I think the general aura of this retro-futuristic design is calling to a bygone era, of a time when people looked to the stars with a sense of awe and wonder before the hyper-fantasy sci-fi stories of Star Wars, Warhammer, and Mass Effect changed the ways we saw spaceships forever. And this is reflected in the architecture of the designs. If you look at a real-world space shuttle, at the ISS and other space tech of our own, it has a certain simplicity. Going to space is hard. It's an immense effort. It takes a lot of fuel to shoot stuff up, and the more stuff you have, the more fuel you need. It's a never-ending cycle. Everything serves a purpose. Everything is designed perfectly for one reason or another. and everything has to be reliable. Electronic servos can fail, a manual lever much less so. So like in real shuttles, the ship design within the worlds like Starfield or Alien feature incredibly practical layouts. Hundreds of thousands of menial switches and dials and levers, screens upon screens of data and information. Unlike your generic sci-fi where the technology is tantamount to magic, with holographic screens, faster than light travel, or what's literally a cathedral in space, there is some basis of reality in these stories. Not that they are true-to-life speculative stories, you still have the alien monsters, the Dovahkiin in space, and windstorms on Mars dozens of times more powerful than the Red Planet could ever produce. But they make the attempt. The larger spacesuits and use of materials and designs we see in modern or even retro rockets. Massive blankets made to protect from the heat, machinery covered in silver or golden foils, and massive satellite dishes. While there is pretty much no punk to be found, it is still an interesting concept to explore. How do we do sci-fi while pertaining to the rules of reality? Or at least paying homage to the way things are done in a realistic adjacent way? When it's done in that direction, I'm all for it. As a punk, this is the first one we've covered where I think the label is being used just to establish an aesthetic devoid from any other underlying topics. Now, cassette retro future styles in a specific way can be found in everything from Blade Runner, which is obviously cyberpunk, to Fallout, which would be atomic punk, as it's not really a genre on its own, but instead a style of aesthetics within the general genre of sci-fi, which is why even Star Wars qualifies with the semi-analog tech of the original series. What we're looking for more specifically is NASA punk. Stuff that harkens back to exploration during the Cold War, when people looked at the moon and wanted to go there, so we did. Now, with this bare bones definition of NASA punk established, what series fit into this? Starfield, obviously. The whole aesthetic from the multicolor band to the ship designs to the spacesuits seems to call back to the tech of the 60s and 70s. A flat, semi-warm white tone to all the tech mixed with generic old-school computer fonts and textures and designs that feel like rockets used by the Apollo mission, updated to fit within a sci-fi universe. Next would be The Martian, which is very explicitly trying to tell a story in the near future of our species, in a world where it tries to replicate real and honest principles of engineering, spaceflight, and physics. While I'm no rocket scientist, I do know that others much smarter than I, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, have claimed it does a good job of portraying that realistic side of space exploration and even disaster.
Survival is not just, let me just try to live until someone gets me. It's, let me invoke clever scientific solutions and engineering solutions to the problems that lay before me. It's a celebration of the value of being scientifically literate, because you never know when you might get stranded on Mars.
Alien, as we brought up before, gets a little into biopunk with the engineered xenomorphs and the designs of H.R. Geiger obviously going on to inform artists in the future, like those who had made the game Scorn. The ships themselves feature a very retro-future look. Everything is simple, yet blocky. It all serves a purpose, and while very sci-fi, takes a semi-realist look into space travel with ships that put their crew into stasis while they are transported hundreds of millions of miles throughout the galaxy. Wolfenstein comes back for another punk video as the entire moon mission from the New Order screams this style of cassette retrofuturism. We see the same white blocky tech backed up by space guns and analog computers, but with more of that classic Wolfenstein diesel punk twist on top of it. Which also the same goes for Deathloop, trying to harken back to a bygone age of the 70s, although it is at the same time kind of lumped into Atom Punk, which we had talked about before. A main thing I'd like to point out here is that we're getting very granular. NASA Punk, as a genre, if you wanted to define it as such, is a very specific offshoot of cassette retrofuturism, which itself is a subsect of just retrofuturism, which then just comes generally from cyberpunk. Basically, when we talk about NASA punk, we're trying to get to the bottom of a Russian nesting doll that never really ends. How granular or specific you want to get is up to the person. I don't mind NASA punk as a sub-genre of cyberpunk or sci-fi that calls to the 60s and 70s specifically, or that cassette retrofuturism is a slightly larger version of that. It just depends on the person, and it does help to make the distinctions between these stories more succinct. Take a few examples. Look at Skyrim, Darksiders, Star Wars, and Game of Thrones. These are all very broadly fantasy, but we still separate from there. You have high fantasy, dramatic theological fantasy, dark, bleak, and a realist fantasy, and space fantasy, which all work and help us draw a line in what we're talking about. You'd be correct to say that Skyrim and Star Wars are both fantastical stories, but if you put them both on a single whiteboard and just write fantasy in bold letters above it, nerds on the internet are going to be very upset with you. And I just wanted to use this super minuscule topic to address something I've seen in all the comments across every punk video I've made so far. Whether it be diesel, atomic, solar, biopunk, etc., it's a comment that reads something like, "Isn't this just blank sci-fi?" Which is true. All of these are. But labels, language, and artistic expression are not binary in the forms that they take. Multiple things can be true at once. Dieselpunk is a weird mixed match of steampunk and cyberpunk but set after World War II. Biopunk is cyberpunk but just more specific. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. Of course, we go down the path of redundancy, but if I say a story is science fiction, what do you envision in your mind right away? Warhammer? Wolfenstein? Mass Effect? Iron Man? These all fit. They all work. But they're all incredibly different at the same time. I understand the idea that it might muddy the water and gives titles like cyberpunk less meaning overall. But it's good to expand our understanding of these ideas, especially as new ideas come into play. Fantasy for a long time was Lord of the Rings. Now, you look out at stories like Vox Machina, Age of Sigmar, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and more. The genre has expanded to depths unlike nothing you could have ever conceived from the genesis of it. Basically, all in all, I just like to see people express themselves and try something new. Even if it's obviously derivative or just flat out fails in execution. Art lives and dies with new ideas. If people stop trying to express their ideas with new concepts or genres that flesh out something that already exists, well, you just get the MCU. And I'd rather have 50 bad stories with passion and thought put into them than 10 alright stories that all read exactly the same. This was my complaint with steampunk from before, or The Wheel of Time, and I stand by it. Art, writing, creativity at its core. This is how the symphony of human emotions are portrayed to us, how we can share information about how we think, how we feel, and how we imagine endlessly.
We're going to have to start writing science fiction again all over. We're going to have to find something else to write about, I guess.
To me, even if it doesn't stand out enough to be its own thing, NASA punk, or the idea within, is a beautiful reminder that there are no real guidelines. Everything is arbitrary, everything is as granular or as broad as we make it, and that things change. Things will never stay the same. The stories being told now are a culmination of over 4 millenniums of human expression and ideas. We, as human beings, continue to expand, grow, share, and inject our thoughts and loves and passions into the things we create, and I'd rather someone go out and make something than someone feel like there's no point to do something new because all the rules have been written. But that's just me. Let me know down below what you think about NASA punk or even just cassette retrofuturism in general. God, it's still such a long name. What stories of this caliber are your favorite, and do you think it's better to have more labels or just to be more broad with our definitions? With that, we're at the end. Thank you very much for watching. If you've liked this, be sure to subscribe, share, and like the video if you want to support what I do here on YouTube. Become a member or a patron and get access to every single video up to a week early with some extra bonuses like being able to read my scripts and see other behind the scenes content. And like always, if you want to support me in helping a good cause, pick up something from my merch collections linked below. Whether it's a shirt, jacket, apron, or a mug, each and every dime from sales are being donated directly to my local food bank. So get yourself an awesome, super soft piece of clothing while doing good at the same time. As always, stay cool, have fun, and be awesome. Muster out.